Record. Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome to the CP Community Live. This is our once a week hour-long webinar where we discuss a single topic in depth. Today we're joined by Toma. Toma, how do you pronounce your last name?
Zubati.
So we have Toma Zubati here. She is a PhD candidate from Georgia Tech. She is part of the human-centered computing program, and she is going to be presenting on her sub-study within the cognitive empowerment program, where and you'll hear more about this, but basically she has been giving people in our study Google Homes, which is similar to like an Alexa. So it's a device that you can talk to, and they've been using it for all kinds of interesting things to improve their lives. And I'll give her a chance to talk in a moment. Like I mentioned a few minutes ago, the CP, the Cognitive Empowerment Program, is a research study here at Emory done in collaboration with Georgia Tech. It is a year-long intensive therapeutic program where participants with mild cognitive impairment and their care partners do several hours of programming every week. Right now, all of that programming is done virtually. Once COVID-19 is over, we'll be able to do it back in person again here in our offices on the Emory campus. And then also within that, we have lots of sub-studies, including the study that you guys will be hearing about today. So without further ado, Toma, would you like to introduce yourself and also tell us about the results of your project so far?
Sure. Thanks so much, Matt, for that awesome introduction. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you guys all for coming. So I'm Toma. Like Matt said, a PhD student at Georgia Tech. I study human-centered computing. So I'm interested in questions like, how can we use technology to empower people and make their lives better without having people have to adapt to the technology? So like, how can we make technology more usable and useful? And so I'm, without further ado, going to pull up the presentation for today, which I hope you can see. Cool. So this talk is called Learning from the Google Home Studies in the Cognitive Empowerment Program, and presenting the work that we recently published in the CHI conference, which is the Conference for Human-Computer Interactions, the premier conference in our field. So it seems like the community really cared about our results, so that's super exciting. And so there's a lot of great researchers involved in this, and just like to acknowledge the Cognitive Empowerment Program for providing a space for us to be able to do this type of work, and all of the people that have been involved, including Matt, and making sure that this study can actually happen. Okay, so as Matt said, we're talking here about Google Home. So what is a Google Home? A Google Home is called, another word for it is a conversational assistant or conversational agent. And what's cool about this is you can think of it like a smart speaker. So you can talk to it, it can talk back to you so you can hear what it's saying. And the cool thing is that in order to interact with it, you just need to use English. You don't need to think about what button you need to press or how you need to formulate your idea into something that you can type or go to a website. You just need to ask, and Google can understand you and respond to you at a distance. So it could be in your kitchen, you could be on your couch, and you could ask it questions. It can also support your memory. So if you set a reminder for yourself to do something, alarms, timers, digital calendaring, all of that. Social support, it's lonely nowadays when we can't get out much, and sometimes it's just nice to be able to say hi to somebody that's not your partner or somebody that you live with. But even beyond that, there's a lot of like entertainment values, so she can tell jokes, things like that. And like it's a programmable interface. So there's a lot, like I'm talking thousands and thousands of applications that have been built to extend Google Home. And so our members and care partners who've participated have used some of these in the form of like games or jokes, but there's so much more in terms of the potential for personalization. So to summarize what's happened so far is 17 dyads have been using the Google Home. The study duration is 10 weeks, but we don't take it away after. We just see what you're doing without having the context of the study, just because it's a little bit different when you know that you're being studied. And then we conducted interviews and surveys in addition to actually analyzing the interactions with the Google Home to get a better perspective on the experience that participants were having. And so here's the kind of summary result of all of the interactions that we had. So I don't want to steal my own thunder here for later, but one of the really cool findings from our study was that members specifically and care partners, our participants, use the Google Home much more than other participants their age, not even counting the cognitive impairment variable, but even just their age in other studies. So we had a lot more engagement with the Google Home and over a longer period of time than had been recorded in other studies. And this figure shows the relative interaction categories that people did. So what did people do with it? The most common thing that people did with it was listen to the news, which is kind of funny. Next up there is calendaring, which is really cool. The digital calendar is just a Google Calendar. You can have different permissions, so the Google Home knows your voice. So it knows when the member is talking, and it knows when the care partner is talking. So there's a lot of opportunity for personalization there. And then there was a lot of music use. You can see alarms and routines. These are also some of those kind of very functional aspects of the Google Home. So it was a nice balance between kind of function and entertainment, which we thought is great. And so you might be wondering what question means. Question was literally if they were asking the Google Home a question, so they could ask like, how much protein is in a cup of chickpeas? And Google would be able to help with that. Or if you're having a dinner party and you want to ask a question about something that is being contested at the table, it's also a fun kind of tool. And so the three main use cases that we were able to kind of find out of that map were coordination and planning at the level of the dyad. So two people involved, it's a conversation and they're trying to plan out or coordinate for something. The entertainment value, where it's both for the dyad and the individual. Maybe like the difference between that being, say you're playing music just by yourself, or you're playing music to set the tone for a party that you're having, obviously pre-COVID times, or a digital party. And then finally, information foraging. So this is actually seeking information, for example, the news, or I guess the news these days could be entertainment, but seeking information like what's the weather, what time is it, answering questions like how much protein is in a cup of chickpeas. All of that stuff is considered information foraging behavior. And there's also kind of a social context for that. Like say you're sitting at the table with your partner discussing what to eat for dinner, versus the individual component of that where you're sitting watching TV on the couch and you want to know how old the actor is that you're watching. So lots of interesting kind of opportunities there. So we'll start with the collaborative kind of coordination and planning use case. So this was great for like weekly scheduling, coordinating who's going to walk the dog, remembering to eat, remembering to turn the stove off. So alarms, what we learned from this experience is that there's three ways to do this kind of coordinating and planning with the Google Home. The first way is alarms. Sorry, I should backtrack. We thought that the way to do it would be reminders because it's called a reminder. But as it turned out, Google Home's reminders are just not loud enough for people to actually be able to like hear them or respond to them. And sometimes it just was easy to not notice that it happened. And so what we actually learned, and this was something that a member and care partner dyad discovered, was that alarms actually work much better with the Google Home. And in fact, Google supports labeled alarms. So there was really no difference in terms of the functionality between alarms and reminders, but alarms work so much better. So if any of y'all have a Google Home and you've been trying to use it to remind yourself to do things, we would recommend using the alarms instead of the reminders. And then finally, calendaring. So for the actual member in the CEP program, there's a whole curriculum around cognitive support and planning and compensatory strategies, basically to help people deal with losing cognition or not having the same cognition that they're used to. And where we kind of fit into that is we can provide support for the care partner. So if the member has their own programming and they have the paper calendar and they're doing that and they're working with that, the part of it is supporting the care partner in kind of managing the daily schedule and syncing up with the member. And then the other part of it is actually like the initiation. So we're going to be doing a study a little bit later in the year to actually explore how the Google Home might help with initiating the behaviors or remembering to actually start the behavior. So another use case of the Google Home is, of course, entertainment. It is basically a speaker, as I mentioned, so it's a smart speaker. So what does speakers do? They play music. Google is connected to an infinite library of free tunes. There is so much cool stuff to listen to, and all you have to do is say, I don't want to trigger mine or anybody else's, so we'll say magic words, play me the Beatles or play me a specific song. And it's remarkable at how good it is at knowing what song you want to play. And like I said, this is great. We've seen dyads setting up an Italian dinner and listening to Italian music, or making French inspired cuisine and having like a French playlist playing in the background, and just like getting more excited, especially now that we're stuck at home all day. Like, it's really hard to continue finding joy in the everyday things, and I find that music is really helpful. But you can also do more than that. You can watch different videos. We had some people watching their like church broadcasts through the Google Home in the morning. We had people listening to the news. There's all sorts of, like, you could listen to the radio, you could listen to like news shows, podcasts. There's literally endless amounts of content on that thing. And games. There's probably tens of thousands of games that have been developed just for this, and they're fun. Some of them are individual, others are group. And so we had all of the games that were played in our study were the trivia games. So everybody played trivia games. And what was funny was that in all of the other studies that I read about Google Home usage, games are considered one of the hardest things to access, because in order to get to the game, you have to tell Google that you want to play the game. Then you have to pick the game that you want to play. And it's kind of more involved than just saying, hey, what's the weather? And so we found that they were able to, or y'all were able to easily access this and then actually play a lot, like 20 or 30 rounds. So there was a lot of engagement in that, which we found really exciting. And then finally, getting information used for like information foraging. One of the coolest examples of this that we found was somebody successfully using the Google Home for recipe management. Now, this was a care partner. And this care partner basically was a very, very big cooking fan. All of the participants who loved cooking enjoyed the prospect of, if you ask for a recipe for chicken wings, it'll literally give you like 10,000. And you can pick, like, you can look at all of these different recipes for chicken wings and decide this is the one based on what I have in the house, whatever. And then what's really cool is, on like your phone, which kind of gets in the way when you're trying to cook, it automatically presents recipes in a way that's super easy to follow. So it's just standing on your desk, going kind of step by step. You can see everything, and you're not like on your phone and on this thing at the same time. And also, it can keep track of a million things at the same time, unlike us. So you can ask it, set an alarm for 30 minutes for the water boiling, for the potatoes, set a timer for 12 minutes for the pasta, set a timer for 10 minutes for the, like, heating something up. And it can keep track of all of these different timers and alarms simultaneously, making cooking a lot less stressful, because when it goes off, it'll actually tell you what timer it is. And so it can help kind of manage that experience. But beyond just recipes, there's, like I said, all sorts of information, like fun facts, nutritional information that you can get out of it, historical facts, celebrity facts. And there's a lot of kind of fun information that it can teach you. So getting into kind of the highlights of the research, I should say, the main takeaway is that, in fact, people use this. So when we first started the study, it was kind of a probe. Were people ever going to use this technology, especially in this age group? There's just not a lot of data that exists. All the data said that no, like, this wasn't going to happen. But what ended up happening was we saw pretty, I would say, if you take out the initial bump of how much people use it the first week because it's new and exciting, we had pretty consistent usage week to week and across both functional and entertainment-based uses. So that suggests to us that this is working for something. And so now what we're interested in is potentially like building on top of this infrastructure that we have now established as being potentially viable. So also, what was interesting was that the participants who actually used the Google Home a lot found it fun and socially engaging. And so this came up when they were talking about it. And so they would use words like she or her to refer to things that the Google Assistant had done for them. And this was fitting. Most of them had a female voice for their Google Home. So they really felt like it was an agent, like a character in their lives. And some participants actually explicitly called her part of the family, our family's executive assistant, another husband, another partner. There was really like this sense of another agent coming into the care network. And so that was really exciting. One of the coolest, I think, findings that we had was that some people actually talked to their Google Homes and had conversations that were satisfying. So they could, or sometimes really unsatisfying. Like we had one partner or one participant say that it was their anniversary and Google responded, "I don't know how to help with that." So sometimes Google can be blatantly socially inappropriate, and we're still working on that. We don't work directly with Google right now, so there's only so much that we can do. But it lets us question kind of some of the things that we can build on to make this experience even more valuable. And so the main kind of question that we're trying to answer is, are conversational assistants empowering for our participants, for people with mild cognitive impairment and their care partners, and for that dyadic kind of relationship? And so it seems like so far we're getting a lot of feedback that says yes. And I'd just like to preface it by saying that a lot of we had very few people say that they were ever frustrated with the Google Home, but sometimes people would feel like they were a little bit overwhelmed by the amount of functionality that it offered. But all of that being said, people found ways to succeed and they used the things that worked for them, which ultimately was the most important thing. And so part of this presentation was us kind of, or me sharing what worked for folks. So alarms worked for folks. The entertainment part of it worked for folks. The calendaring part of it worked really well. But here are some kind of other more specific examples. So one member had a lot of anxiety around cooking because she had had episodes where she had forgotten to turn off the stove after cooking. And so now with the Google Home, she just added it to her routine that every time she cooks, she tells Google to remind her in 5 minutes after she finishes to make sure that the stove is off, just to relieve her of that anxiety of having to think about whether or not it's on. And then also we have we're out in Atlanta here. I'm not sure if all of y'all are in Atlanta, but it rains a lot here. So we had a lot of asking, what's the likelihood that it's going to rain today? Is it going to rain tomorrow? People trying to plan their walk, plan their day. There's also a lot of easy access to interactions that can just improve quality of life, especially if you're sitting at home all day. And I mean, as a researcher on this project, like I use the Google Home for this stuff too, because it does get kind of old not being able to go out with friends and celebrate and do things. So listening to music, getting jokes, their dad jokes are not really that funny. So they're child appropriate, funny. The games, the videos, the information is great. It's all the same information that's on your phone, but you don't have to look at anything, which after you've been staring at the medium-sized screen or the big screen all day, it's just like nice to not have a screen. And then finally, there's this real feeling of this relationship building between the care partner, the person with MCI, and the Google Home. So there's this idea that like the Google Home could be used to offload and assist with some tasks, because being a care partner is very demanding, and anything that can be done to kind of scaffold, the word that we used was scaffolding. So scaffolding future interactions. So for example, a care partner could set some alarms in advance the day before or the week before, or set alarms that are repeating if there's a more regular rhythm or a schedule established. And then this has kind of a dual function. First of all, the person with MCI, the members could actually just ask, hey, Google, what's on my calendar today? What am I doing today? And Google had the full record. So it was really easy. What's going on at 3? Oh, it's right there. Google knows. And then the best part was at 3, there would be a little chime, and then you would know to go start that activity. So there's a lot of potential to further like build on this capability, and we're really excited to pursue that. So shameless plug for the Google Home study. If you're interested in trying the Google Home and you're one of our members or care partners, you can reach out to your coach, or you can just email me at this email. And our future studies will continue looking at kind of how we can use the Google Home for supporting medication schedules, coordinating the calendars, all of this more functional and personalized level stuff. Now that we've kind of demonstrated that people can use the voice interface as it is. And so, yeah, if you're interested, I'd be delighted to add you guys to our study group and work with y'all. I'm gonna just bring it back to this one slide, or to the previous slide, for our discussion. And then, yeah.
Thank you, Toma. That was awesome. So as a reminder to everyone, if anyone has any questions, I wanted to save some time for people to ask questions to Toma about her study, about the Google Home, things that you guys can do in your guys' lives, even if you don't participate in the cognitive empowerment study. And I want to kick it off, Toma, with just a few questions. So first of all, for people that don't own like an Alexa or a Google Home, could you either demonstrate, or we can talk about the magic words? So for anyone who doesn't know, so with a Google Home, you have to say, "Hey Google, something, 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 something." So if Toma says it right now, her Google Home is going to start talking to her. So I think that's what she meant by she can't say the magic words right now. But normally you would start off by saying, "Hey Google." So can you give us like some like real world examples of like what some of these things actually look like in the real world?
Yeah, totally. And I'll try to kill two birds with one stone. Even if you don't have a Google Home, if you might have an iPhone, and you can ask Siri pretty much the same question, but instead of saying Siri, say, "Hey Google." But you could also download the Google Assistant app. And so I have the Google Assistant app, and I can ask it the same question, and you guys should be able to hear what it says. So we could say, "Hey Google, how much protein is in a can of chickpeas?"
There are 2.4 grams of protein in 1 tablespoon of chickpeas.
Yeah.
That's
So
pretty cool. So one thing I wanted to highlight that you mentioned, it's only because it's my favorite use of the Google Home, is being able to layer on your alarms, especially when cooking. So it comes in super handy when you're cooking like a really complicated meal like Thanksgiving. So like I would say like, okay, hey Google, set a turkey timer for 4 hours, set a mashed potato timer for 30 minutes, set a gravy timer for 10 minutes. And then like as those things are happening, it says like the turkey is done, the mashed potatoes are done, the whatever is done. And that was super handy for cooking like complicated meals.
totally.
Do you have any other suggestions for people that may not be in the study, like some other like takeaway, some like concrete examples of things that people could use in their lives right now?
Yeah, one thing that was super popular and I think is super simple to use is the routines. So it comes with kind of pre-programmed routines, which is their way of saying there's a bunch of stuff that happens if you just say one thing. So you saying one thing being like good morning. So you can say, "Hey Google, good morning." And that would trigger your Google Home to say, do all of the actions that you told it to do every time you say good morning. And so there's in the app for the Google Home, you can set what you want it to do. So for example, you can set it to tell you the weather, you can set it to go over your calendar, go through your reminders, and then say you want it to automatically set it to tell you a joke right after. You can set that to be your good morning routine. And then in the morning when you go down to your kitchen, you can say, "Hey Google, good morning." And it'll tell you all of these things just off the bat. And it's a really nice kind of setting for the day to just get centered with what's going on today, how it relates to like if you have to coordinate with somebody. That I would say is one of the really useful things.
I actually have an example of that. This is a little bit more advanced, and I know it wasn't part of your study, but also with Google Home, it can connect to, nowadays you can get off the shelf, like from the store, you can get like other smart devices, like you can get smart light bulbs and other like smart locks for your door or and things like that. So I actually have a routine where I say, "Hey Google, good night," and it turns the light bulbs off and it turns my TV off. And I just got a lock for my door, and it's gonna make sure the door is locked too. So you can kind of like automate things in your home that way too. It's a little bit more complicated because you got to bring in other devices, but that's another example of a routine.
Yeah, and I'm seeing Michael, I'm seeing your comment down here, and I'm just taking a note of it. but I totally agree. It's like if you have it one place in your house, like you get used to interacting with it, and then it's tough to not have it in other places. I feel like there's like two solutions. One solution I would say is kind of janky, which would be if you unplug it and then move it upstairs when you're going to bed. Some folks do that. You don't have to. It's not going to forget anything if you unplug it, but it's a little bit inconvenient in terms of just having to move it. But you could also get another one, and also folks have that. And what's cool about that is that they talk to each other. So you could just unplug the same cord and like plug it into another one or into another outlet upstairs, or you could just get a whole nother Google Home and plug it in upstairs, and then they could talk to each other. So you could use it as like an intercom. This is another common use case, is you can speak from your phone. You could be anywhere in the world if there's internet, and it will play what you're saying in your voice on your Google Home. So it could be as simple as like checking in, coming home from the grocery store, like open the garage for me in 5 minutes, or as complicated as, hey grandma, like nice to see you, I'm in France right now, like blah blah blah, whatever you want.
I don't know about Google Homes, but I have seen battery cases for Alexas. So you put the Alexa in a little case that has a battery, and then you're able to move that around. My parents have that at their home. So when they go out to the pool area, they bring it with them, and then when they come back inside, they bring it back. So
that's a great idea. We should investigate and see if we can get some of those.
Yeah, so if anyone else has any other questions, please put them in chat. Toma, we also had another question. This is kind of why I was asking for some like real world examples, but someone was asking, do you know of any resources, maybe like online, to get training in how to learn these specific things? Because also as someone who uses these devices, I do think that this is one of the most difficult parts of using them. Is sometimes I'm like, I know it does a million things, but I don't know what they are. If someone were to demonstrate or show me, then I start using them. So do you know of any resources where you can learn what the different commands are?
Yeah. So I think this is a great kind of segue to a point that I forgot to make, which was our training materials that we made to support participants in this study ended up being super useful. And part of it was that the first training material that we gave was basically like a table, and it had 5 things. It had, I want to play music, I want to set a reminder, I want to add something to my calendar, I want to add something to my shopping list. And you were able to just, it said right there, like, hey Google, play music, hey Google, add something to my shopping list. And so it literally said exactly what you needed to say in order to accomplish what you wanted to accomplish. That was kind of step 1. That was like dipping your toes. And then as we got more feedback, we got feedback about like specific functions that people needed help with, like some of the more involved things, like the routines that we were talking about, where maybe people like wanted more support understanding what the options are for things that you can add to your routine. And Matt, like I just learned that you can loop a skill to be the last thing in your routine. So like Kunal just made some skills, and I can say, make the last thing, tell Google to check something. And I had no idea that I could do that until like last week.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think Alexas can do that. One thing that I have a trouble with Alexas, because it was very similar, is that if Alexa has a command, like I think Alexa has a command like have a good night, and if I want that to be my command, then it blocks me. It says I can't do that because it's already taken. I think Google Homes, you can say like, I don't care if Google already has one, I want this to be mine. So
yeah, that's true. Like you can, it's a very Android-esque, right? You can override whatever you want and make it customized to whatever.
So we got another question in, and I'm surprised it took this long to get this question, because this is one of our most common questions. What about the privacy issues associated with all your activities being monitored by Google? Have you has this come up in the study? Like have members and care partners talked about this?
Yeah, and this was a like foundational question that we investigated before doing this study. So when we first decided to do the study, the first thing that we did was work with a privacy expert to fully evaluate what the privacy risks are of using the Google Home and using the Alexa in an intimate context. And so by intimate, I mean like in your house. And so there was a lot of information that we learned. First of all, we learned about like how the cloud works, right? And how it's not just that the information that is being collected about your use is sitting in your device and on your phone. It's living on servers that are in a different country, probably, that you will never see, and you might not know the people that interact with your data. That was a very scary concept. That being said, what we investigated further was to see how we could mitigate that in cases where there was really sensitive information being exchanged. So for us, like things that were really important were for the Google to not know that our participants were older adults with mild cognitive impairment. That was really important to us. So to mitigate that, we made them fake accounts that said they were born in 82 and with fake no gender, so they can't target them, and purposely depersonalize their information in the context of Google. The next step that we took was instruct them, give them a set of use cases where they should mute the Google. So muting the Google has been actually, there was a study done that says when you mute it, its network connection is disrupted. So it's no longer connected to the internet and it cannot send what it was going to send. And what it does send when it isn't when it's not muted is basically the transcription of what it thinks you said. So it used to do this thing where it would actually keep the recording of you saying it, and now it doesn't do that every time. Most of the time it doesn't do that because it doesn't, first of all, it's too much, like it's too heavy data, it's too big, but also after a while it learns the way that you talk. So part of it is it learning the way that your voice sounds. And so after a while, if you're asking something that's super common, it already knows, like it doesn't need to keep that recording, but it does keep what you asked, what time you asked it, and then what the response was. And so that's all available in your My Activity log. And so you as a participant can actually delete things if there's something you don't want us to see. You have a lot of power in terms of that, and you can request that full log at any time to be downloaded from Google. And so what we basically told the participants was if they're talking to, say they're having a telehealth appointment, they should mute their Google Home because they're talking to their doctor about a private sensitive health matter and they might reveal personally identifiable information. But in terms of other instances, there were really no other cases where they could have revealed personally identifiable information because the Google only knew them by a first name or a nickname. There was no last name attached, no attachment to their other accounts. And we really took an effort to try to preserve the privacy of the participants as much as possible. The next step that we could take is getting a data partition in Google. But we're not there yet. Maybe if Google accepts me to be one of their like PhD fellows or something, we could get even more fancy with how we take our data. But then what happens is you can actually delete the data off of Google after you're done using it. So we pipe the data. We didn't work with the data in the Google environment. We worked with the data in the Georgia Tech secure environment, kept the data super secure and anonymized after we took it. So after the data was in logs, it wasn't attached to the participants' names. There were a lot of steps that we took to really try to preserve the privacy of our participants. It's one of my biggest values as a researcher in the space. And so I hope that we're succeeding by their standards.
So just getting back to people that are not in the study. So some things that anybody could do is not giving Google 100% honest answers about who you are and what your name is and what your gender is and all that. Mute, like you can mute your devices, so you can cut it off from the internet. So I think like those are ways to control your security. Someone did ask, because you mentioned some training materials that you put together. Toma, is that available to be shared outside of the program?
It actually is. Let me get the link right now and I'll be able to share it with you.
So someone asked the question, how would they do it themselves using Google Assistant? So I think I answered that. So some of the data things were a little bit unique to the program. However, like I said, just not telling Google all the honest answers about yourself, and then muting it when you're doing something that has to do with like private information about yourself. Toma, one other question I just wanted to, it looks like Toma is posting some training materials in the chat.
Yep.
One other thing I wanted to bring up was We were using one of the fancier Google Homes. Can you talk about some of like the kind of like more cheaper options that are out there?
Yeah, absolutely. So we were using a Google Home Hub, which all that means is there's a screen on it. And so that makes it like $50 more expensive than the base model, which doesn't have a screen and still has all of the same functionality. The main idea behind having the screen was so that you could more easily diagnose your error or its error. So say you said, what is the weather? And it heard, what is the waffle? It would say, what is the waffle? And so you would know that it thought that you said, what is the waffle? And so that was a piece of feedback that's important, but at the same time, it's like not essential. You could say, what is the weather? It heard, what is the waffle? It would ask you, I don't understand what you meant by that. And then you could just as easily correct course. So it has verbal, like audio ways of mitigating if it thinks that there's a problem. So I totally think that if you're interested in trying it out, you could probably get the Echo or the Google Home Mini. And it's like 29, it's either 19.99 or 29.99 just to try it out. And another great option would be just trying the Google Assistant app. I feel like, but it is tied to the phone, which is kind of annoying, but it's also kind of nice because everything else is on the phone. And if you are using the features on your phone, you could download the other Google apps. So you could download Google Calendar, and then your Google Assistant, any reminders that you set would automatically appear in your Google Calendar. And so there's definitely like Google works on whatever device you use it on. So you could use any device to access this tool.
Yeah, everyone, sorry, we're gonna repost that link right now. It just didn't go out to everyone. Nope, not that one. Toma, could you post it in chat? But then when you choose to do panelists and attendees.
Yes, sorry.
There you go. Now everyone, if everyone looks in chat, you should be able to see that link to get the training materials that are at the bottom of that document.
Yep. And so if you're looking at that training materials, guys, the what can Google Home do is a document that has every single comprehensive list, not every single, but like all of the things that were the most useful. And there's actually links to videos that go into depth on the more kind of advanced features. And then the one called Cheat Sheet, Google Home Cheat Sheet for members and caregivers, that's the one where it's just the 5 basic things that you can do. And then it also says, for your privacy, avoid mentioning the real name of your medications and avoid mentioning sensitive personal information. So use that mute button. So that guidance is there.
One other thing I wanted to mention, just going back to what I was saying with, you were saying with the different models of Google Home, is just for everyone's kind of knowledge is that, like we mentioned, there are a lot of different devices out there. There's like Google Home, there's Alexa, and there's Siri, and there's all these things. There is now starting to be this like spread in the market where you can get some pretty like inexpensive devices if all you want is like to be able to talk back and forth. And if you want the ones that have like really great like music sound quality and stuff, those tend to be a little bit more expensive, but like just the basic functionality, being able to like ask questions and like hear the answers, those tend to be like pretty inexpensive. And especially like, obviously it can get pretty pricey if you put one of these in every room in your house. But as an example, I bought one of the very least expensive ones to put in my bathroom to control a speaker so I could control music while in the shower. It doesn't go in the shower with you, it's just in the bathroom. But that was like, because I just wanted it for like kind of one use. So I didn't want to get a fancy one. I just wanted a cheaper one.
Totally. Yeah, and I would totally echo that. Like within the study, I've seen folks get a second, exactly the same one. I've seen them get a second smaller one that's just for like what Michael was saying, actually for listening to the nighttime sounds with the good night routine. And we also had somebody get like one of the super, super big fancy ones. It's like a real speaker and it weighed like 20 pounds. And I was like, this is amazing, but I've never even seen one of these. So there's depending on what you want to use it for and how sensitive your ears are to sound quality, you can kind of pick what's within the budget.
Does anyone else have any other questions? Please post them in chat or in the Q&A section. Otherwise, we'll probably start wrapping up soon. Really quickly though, just for anyone interested in keeping up to date with CEP Community Live events, I'm going to put that link in the chat again. So there's one link to go to the website to sign up to be part of our mailing list for these other events. We also, I'm going to put the link to learn more about our study or how to join our study. The long story short is that you have to get a referral from our cognitive clinic at Executive Park 12 here at Emory. So in there, there's a website with a phone number, and you can get an appointment there to get a referral. The reason why we do that is because we have a lot of different studies for the range of age-related diagnoses. So like our studies primarily focus on mild cognitive impairment. We have other targeting Alzheimer's. We have other just for healthy aging. Like we want to like study people that like are healthy but are getting older. Yeah, so that's why all of our referrals go through the clinic, is that our clinicians are able to say, okay, you're probably appropriate for this study, well, you're probably appropriate for another study.
Nice.
So we have one more question. Have you seen an issue of folks switching away from their phone for these purposes? I do reminders for meds now and set timers while cooking, but I do that on my iPhone. Why would it transition? So it's like, why would you use this device over just using a phone, which they may already have?
Yeah, honestly, there's like no reason. If you're satisfied with the reminders and the way that you manage the information on your phone, that's awesome. I would say the biggest reason is like the hands-offness. So maybe there's certain situations in which you want to use the audio, but you don't necessarily want to be on your phone. So maybe if you're like trying to get the medication at the same time as using your phone, that might be challenging. Or like what Matt was saying with the cooking, that's pretty common. I would just say that like I don't like to think of it as like I'm transferring all of my reminding capabilities into the Google Home. It's more like there's certain tasks that it's really, really useful for, and other things that I just don't use it for at all. And so it's just about picking that balance for yourself.
Yeah, as an example with that, I know that there were some people in the study that were trying to connect it to their digital calendar. So they were able to like look in their phone and see like events in their calendar, and the events in their phone were created by them talking to their Google Home. So they say, hey, Google, make a calendar event for tomorrow, and then it'll pop up in their phone.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that I would say that was like the most popular use case, was like people wanting to sync their information across all of their devices so that it didn't matter who you asked, that you could always get the information. Ooh, we got another. Oh, did we get another? Oh yeah.
No, it's just
oh, cool.
People seem to be liking the presentation, and yeah, if anyone has any last minute questions, please post them in the chat. Otherwise, we'll start wrapping it up in the next couple minutes. Toma, thank you so much. This was really helpful. I'm really hoping that maybe you can come back and tell us more about how the second phase of your study is going. And because I do know that both on Brain Talk Live and a few times here on CEP Community Live, is we've gotten a lot of questions about medication and managing that and managing calendars, because you know, when I talk to especially care partners, is that, you know, managing your calendar with so many different types of like medical appointments, or even if I see this a lot with people that are caring for someone with MCI or dementia, and they have to work too, like they haven't retired yet, and that can be really difficult, like managing that schedule. So hearing how some of those things shake out, I know everyone would be really interested in that.
Yeah, I would say that the medication and the calendar study are next. Michael, the medication study, hopefully, if all of the parts come in time, will include actual sensors. So the idea will be that you'll get the smart pill box, and then maybe we'll put like a couple motion sensors in the kitchen to see how your interactions are with that, and just like to make sure that you're actually using it, and maybe it fell and you didn't actually use it, like things like that. So the progress is coming. We were mainly behind in home installations because of the COVID. So we had some trouble. When I'm doing the Google Home installation, it takes about 40 minutes, and only about like 5 minutes of it needs to be done in the house in reality. In the latter installs, my IRB was approved for me to spend like 45 minutes in the house. So that was fine. But for the other sensors, it really takes a couple of hours for the installation, which is fine. But that's just kind of not technically approved. So we have to be very careful and selective about which sensors we like install in what order and how to prioritize that deployment to make sure that we can make the most of that 45 minutes and give you guys the most value. But there's like some core infrastructure that we will be installing if you're going to do the medication study, for example. So you'll get the pill box and then you'll get like this thing called the hub that takes the data from the pill box and sends it to Georgia Tech. And so once you have the hub, then it's way easier for them to install all the other sensors because you already have the communication bit and they just need to connect all of the other sensors to the communication bit. So there's kind of there's a few steps, but we're starting.
So Toma, you brought up one thing that we don't talk a lot about here on CEP Community Live or on Brain Talk Live, which is the home study. And especially like, because you mentioned is that it kind of stalled this last year with COVID-19. But for people that don't know what the home study is, so the home study is a sub-study within the Cognitive Empowerment Program. So it is only available to people that are part of the larger Cognitive Empowerment Program. And if you're part of the bigger program, you can sign up for the sub-study, which is the home study. And what that does is it's similar to Toma's study, except instead of putting in just the Google Home, they put in different sensors and other smart devices in your home, like across your entire house, so in your kitchen, your living room, your bedroom. And they're trying to make it a lot easier for people to live independently and more safely by themselves. So that is another sub-study that we have going on. But because of COVID-19 and going into people's homes, it's been a little bit difficult this past year, but we're starting to ramp that back up again.
Yeah, we're expecting to have 3, Michael, in response to your question, we're actually launching the 3 first home tech studies this quarter. So the first one is, like we discussed, that medication management one. The second one is actually the safety one. So yes, and we're working on it. It's unclear if it's going to be like which safe. We're going to work with you. We're not going to be like pulling these things out of thin air. We're going to work with you to figure out what kinds of things you want to monitor in your house. Like maybe you want to monitor for floods, or maybe you want to monitor for when the garage door is left open or something like that. And then provide those things so that the Google or whatever would be listening for if the garage door is left open, or if the front door is left open, or if you have a water leak and the sensor picks it up. And all from the other side of that, it's like, what do you do in an emergency? So Google can't dial 911, but it can connect you with your like loved ones if you have an emergency contact set up, and then they can dial 911 on your behalf. But basically the idea is that you could hands-free dial an emergency contact. You can make calls off the Google. And there's also like third-party devices that you can attach to the Google, kind of like the life alert or like the buttons. There's all sorts of different stuff that has been created to support the safety functionality. It just depends on what you want. And then the third home study is going to be focused on sleep. So that's also going to be a case where a lot of sensors are going to get deployed, and we'll be primarily looking at like restfulness during the night and like how often people get up, and doing all sorts of work to see if we can optimize that sleep, because we all know how important sleep is.
Yeah. Well, Toma, thank you very much. This was really great. Looking forward to having you back here. Everyone, thank you for logging into CP Community Live. I'm looking forward to seeing everyone next week. And yeah, have a great rest of your week, everyone. I'm gonna end the recording, and I'm gonna